And we are recording now. So first, I want to say thank you to everyone for connecting with us today. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share with you our ideas and to share some information about the benefits and the requirements around internal audits for registered training organizations. My name is Javier Amaro, and I'm speaking to you today in not only my capacity as have been a consultant for training organizations for more than 15 years, but also as a CEO of ROI Institute Australia and as a trainer as well. And what we're going to share with you today and to discuss with you is what I have learned in those capacities as a trainer, as a manager, as a CEO, and as a consultant for RTOs. What we wanted to achieve today is basically have a bit of a brief explanation of regulatory requirements and something that I wanted to make a lot of emphasis here, regulatory compliance commitments from particularly, but not only, but particularly from the RTO managers, middle managements, and managerial agents. So we're going to talk a lot about that compliance commitments. I wanted to also introduce some compliance management systems and critical parts of those compliance management systems, obviously, because today we will discuss areas around auditing. That critical part of the system that I will talk a lot today will be the evaluation of the system and the monitoring of the system to make sure that that system is not only fit for the purpose, but is actually working. And finally, I'm going to talk about some benefits and principles of internal audits that can be actually used for any of our organizations in order to support the good work and the good governance, good management, and the actual work of those management systems. As you can see, I've been using this flow chart today as my cover page for this webinar, and the reason is because this flow chart basically represents the management system for any organization, but in particular for RTOs, and I have made a few adjustments here to make it relevant to RTOs. We have a quality framework which is created by your policies and procedures and any other documents that you use to support your staff members to do what is legal, to do what is required in order to be compliant. And those have been created based on your and your team understanding of your own operations and regulatory requirements that apply to your operations and other technical requirements that it might be industry code of practice or expectations of students, regulators, government, industry in general. Based on that understanding, we actually have created our own quality framework. That quality framework is managed by the leaders of the organization throughout the continuous improvement cycle. Any management system must go through that continuous improvement cycle because we live in a quite dynamic environment, and it is not acceptable to think that one proposition it will provide us a good guide for performance over a period of time. So we start making some planning with those policies, procedures that will end up in your action plans and operational plans, which we will implement. And those are not only policies and procedures, but in our case, training and assessment strategies, training plans, assessment tools, and so on, that will be put into operations during all the different tasks that we perform. And I'm pretty sure that you guys understand what those tasks are. But actually, I have to say, ASCO has done a great job, but putting those into a different context and talking about marketing, enrollment, support, training and assessment, certification and compliance, or quality management. So that is what we're going to implement. And at some point in this cycle, we'll have to evaluate the performance. And we do that evaluation of our performance because we want to know certain things that are vital to our survival and success. The first one is, well, are we actually compliant with the requirements that we interpreted when we create the framework, the policies, the procedures, and the plans? And we need to now make sure that we know whether we are compliant or not, even before ASCO in this case or any other regulator come and check but as part of their job regulatory work. But we also want to know if our staff members are satisfied with what we're doing, if our clients are satisfied, if the quality of our training products are actually meeting the needs of our students and the industry. And as part of the results of that evaluation, we will make improvements to the system, which will be implemented in the next cycle. So this is a quite dynamic process that will continue over and over again, and we will use it to ensure that our system is not only compliant but fit for the purpose at all times. Do you guys agree with that? I'm just trying to formalize what I'm pretty sure we all have in mind as the way that we manage our quality systems in the RTO environment. And I wanted to talk, and thank you, Ariane, Anne-Marie, Karen, Donna, Deb, for your comments there. Please keep writing your comments and any questions or feedback that you wanted to share with us as well. I wanted to stop a bit in that part of the performance evaluation and what we want to achieve with that part of the evaluation. And I wanted to refer that checking compliance with the actual standard 2 in standards for RTOs. Standard 2 says that we as RTOs need to evaluate information about our performance and use that information to inform the quality assurance of our services. It mentions particularly training and assessment in sound business and educational practices. So basically what it says is that we're going to have to put in place some kind of performance evaluation. It doesn't basically mention directly that that evaluation will be an audit, but we will get to that point soon. And but it does talk that the evidence that we collect during that evaluation must help us for quality assurance, which includes in this context compliance. Thanks, Pamela. Says you cannot download the template. I'll make sure if I can get Fernando to help you with that, that would be great. And Donna says we introduce a collation of the feedback forms and clearly identify where issues where and to create continuous improvement. Fantastic, Donna. And that's a great way to collect information. It might not be the only source, and I will certainly suggest that it's not the only source of information, but is a very valuable source of information for sure. Let's continue to refer or to relate that evaluation stage of our continuous improvement model with other parts of the standards. And we look at it a bit more in depth now. That standard 4. Clause 2.2 tells us that the RTO must ensure it complies with the standards, so all the standards at all times. In order to do that, that means that we continuously monitor compliance in some kind of evaluation, and that's when we start to see the need for an internal audit that happens here, or if you want to call it self-assessment, as ASQA wants to call it now, that will be okay as well. I particularly like to call it by the real name, which is an internal audit. And clause 2.2, which is the focus of ASQA for this year, it says that the RTO must systematically monitor the RTO trainings and assessment strategies and practices to ensure, again, ongoing compliance with the standard 1. So it's interesting that the standard says that we need to be compliant with all standards at all times, but somehow it gives a lot of weight to being compliant against standard 1 because it mentions standard 1 in a specific clause. And that takes us to the concept of self-assurance, which I will talk about it soon. But if we look at it, standard 8, for example, as well, standard 8 tells us that the RTO needs to comply with the requirements of the RTO standards, as well as any other relevant Commonwealth, state, or territory legislation, which makes a bit more broader the regulatory requirements for RTOs, not only the standards as a part of the registration as a training organization, but any other regulatory requirement that applies to you as a business as well. And 8.4 make it quite clear that we are required to make an annual declaration on compliance with these standards, and obviously that declaration has to be informed by some kind of performance evaluation, which today we will discuss what is the best way to do that performance evaluation. So I guess this might be a good time to ask a question here. And let me see if I can bring, or I can get Fernando to please put the first poll of that we have for this webinar. When you're ready, Fernando, if you can make it available to everyone. Fantastic, thank you. So what do you think? Are internal audits required for RTOs? Yes, no, you don't know? And we'll give it a few seconds before we see the results. This is totally anonymous, so don't worry. We don't and we won't know your answers. So do we have results, Fernando, already that we can share? Okay, so we got a 82%. It talks about yes, 12% no, and 6% don't know. Fantastic. And we'll see. Maybe we ask the same question later during the presentation. See if we're changing a bit our perception here. There is not right or wrong answer to that question, by the way. So let's see what ASQA thinks about this. ASQA says that providing an annual declaration confirms that you have systematically monitored your RTO compliance. Somehow you confirm that you have done that. It doesn't really mention the word internal audit. And also it says that you should use the annual declaration as an opportunity to make a self-assessment of your RTO systems and practices against the standards. So you're going to do a self-assessment against standards, and that is a very close definition to what an internal audit is. And it suggested that you probably do want to do those self-assessments a lot more frequent than just once a year. This is just directly from ASQA's website. This says we have just completed an internal audit prior to the annual declaration. We see it as vital to monitor all compliance and identify opportunities to improve. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us. Another comments from ASQA's presentation. This is a slide that ASQA CEO used. Saxon, right? She says that performance assessments, and for those of you that might not know about it, ASQA audits will be called now performance assessments. For some reason, they don't want to use the word audit anymore because it might sound a bit not friendly, and performance assessment sounds more friendly. I'm guessing that is the reason, but that's my opinion. And they talk about that they're going to reposition those audits to become the performance assessment, and they're going to focus in the capacity of RTOs to be compliant with that clause 2.2 that we already look at it, which is around the capacity of the RTO to do those self-assessments. So in other words, the capacity of RTOs to be able to perform some kind of internal audits. I wanted to share with you a couple definitions about what an internal audit is. According to the ISO 19011, which is the international standard for auditing quality system, which is basically what we do here. An internal audit is a systematic, independent, and documented process to obtain objective evidence and evaluating objectively to determine the extent to which an audit criteria are fulfilled. So in other words, it's a systematic process where somebody with an independent and objective view will do an assessment on whether the criteria used for the audit has been met or not. The criteria obviously will depend on the organization, but in our case, being a training organization, the criteria will be the compliance requirements included in the standards and your internal requirements included in your own policies and procedures. And on top of that, you might require to add any contracts that you get into it because of founding or enterprise arrangements that you have made. But quite interesting, I wanted to share with you this other definition on the left-hand side of the slide that I found in the AQTF, old AQTF audit handbook, which I have to recognize I started using that around 17, 18 years ago. And that internal audit definition says a planned, systematic, and documented process used to assess an RTO's compliance. And it says RTOs can conduct internal audits to assess their compliance with the standards and their own policies and procedures as part of their continuous improvement process. That was actually considered to be the definition for regulators, for training organizations, which was included in the old Australian quality training framework that was created before the actual legislation. But the concept is very clear that internal audits, it needs to be used in order to monitor compliance. You can probably see, and later you got more time to look at this, but you can probably see there are similarities between the international standards definition of audits and our definition of audits within the vet sector. Now, that means that we need to follow some very clear and used audit principles that, you know, for auditors, these principles are probably 200-300 years old, but are critical, because if we don't follow these principles, then that means that these audits that we might perform will not add any value to the organization. And to be quite frank here, I have seen RTOs trying to implement audit programs, internal audit programs, and I have seen that not all of them have been successful. And one of the reasons is not following these audit principles. So let's do a quick review of what those principles are. The first one is if we are going to use an internal audit program, or if you want to call it self-assessment, feel free to do so. It has to be a systematic process, because an audit will only be an evaluation at one point in time. Unless we have defined different points in time during a cycle, and we use the information of those specific pictures that we take at that moment to create a more accurate movie of our performance, a more dynamic representation of our performance, we will not be able to improve, to prevent, or to rectify any non-compliance. So it basically doesn't work. It has to be part of a program that have been created based on risk and other priorities. It has to be outcome-based and evidence-based. So when we talk about outcomes focus, what we want to focus is what are we going to use, how are we going to use the findings of the audit? How are we going to implement rectifications or suggestions for improvement? This is not for us to tell us ourselves, are we ready, are we compliant or not compliant? Are we going to continue register as an RTO, or are we going to deregister ourselves? That's not our job. The outcome focus means that we want information that will help us to improve and will help us to prevent any risks related to non-compliance. And that's what we wanted to achieve over here. It will be based on evidence, so it's fair and transparent and open, as we have already ticked a couple boxes there. You have to be flexible in the sense that we must recognize that we all do things in a different way, which means we produce different types of evidence in the work that we do. And trying to use the same pattern for every single training organization is not going to work, because we all have different resources, size, and business models. You have to be always focused on that continuous improvement cycle. Again, we must understand what happens and why it happens, so in order for us to make those changes. Knowing only what happens, it will not help in that continuous improvement. You have to be obviously confidential, because we manage sensible information during the internal review, internal self-assessment, or internal audit. And we need to protect the confidentiality of that information, whether it's private information from students, trainers, industry in general. Even if it's internal audit, it must have a degree of independence. We're not going to ask somebody to actually audit their own work. That's not going to work really well, because we are immersed in what we do, and quite likely we're going to continue to think what we're doing is right. So we need that independence. So we probably get people from different departments to audit somebody else's work. And if our organization is too small, we might need an external person to work there. And we need to recognize that we are not going to be able to audit everything all the time. So we're going to have in our plan some priorities based on the risk that those products or processes are putting into our operation. And we will look more frequently those areas of high risk, and we will look those areas of low risk with a different frequency. Does that make sense? Now, if we don't follow these principles, it is quite likely that the investment that we do in these internal audit practices, whether that is conducted by ourselves or the third party as a consultant that comes in, it's quite likely that we're not going to take the full benefit. So if we are going to commit to this, we must follow those audit principles. That means that we need to have a plan. We can't get into an internal audit process without a plan. And one of the documents that I share with you, it's actually a template for your audit program, which is your plan for, could be for the full year, could be for 2 years. In our case, we do it per year. because that plan, it has to be dynamic, and the priorities change from one year to another based on our own performance and based also on the industry's performance, and changes externals, like changes in the legislation, it could impact that. So that audit program is going to tell us what are our high risk areas and how we're going to monitor or evaluate our performance on those high risk areas. And that will depend on the size, the nature of RTO, the complexity, and the different types of risk that you need to deal with, and also the maturity of your compliance management system. That obviously, when you're introducing a new system, there are higher risks that people will not understand and not using correctly. And if it's a system that has been introduced for a few years, are more likely people to be already informed, trained, and understand how you want people to do things, so that will have a different level of risk altogether. I just want to share these. I don't want to make it too complex, but I just want to share how our audit program works, again, within the continuous improvement process. We establish every year, in our case, audit program objectives, and I'll share with you a few examples of what the objectives could be. We determine how audits will help us to monitor risk in different areas, and we establish a schedule of audits that will be conducted during the year. And then we'll start them conducting those audits, and we get into this cycle below, which is basically the way that we continuously conduct those audits that have been scheduled, that have their own process. But as a consequence, we're going to have some findings in the audit that it might change our priorities for the year, and it might require to schedule all the audits. So it's a dynamic schedule. I want you to think about that, because once we receive those findings, we review whether or not the initial schedule was correct. And if we find out in those audits that something didn't work really well, because we identify a new area that is high risk, we might need to go back here and schedule more frequent audits in certain areas that we didn't see early in the process. The auditing also has to be a formal process that it follows certain required steps. You initiate the audit with an audit plan that is specific for that audit, and that it helps you to prepare the activities that you're going to actually perform during the audits. You conduct those activities as per the plan, and then you prepare and distribute that report. That report, it might or might not have some findings that required a follow-up, and when required a follow-up is because we have recommendations for improvement or rectifications that need to be completed or undertaken. In some cases, those rectifications might be quite important, that you might need to stop something until you rectify due to the risk involved with compliance, and that it will be reported back to the people that are actually managing the program in order to reassess the priorities. And this is a very, very brief view of how these audits will work. So Neil got a question, says, how far do you distribute the audit reports within the organization? That's a great question, and something that a lot of people ask that question. In our organization, we actually distribute the reports within all staff members, and the reason is because these reports talks about the performance of our organization as a system, and we all responsible to make sure that our performance achieve our objectives, including compliance. I do understand that in many organizations there is a high turnover of certain staff members, particularly trainers, and you probably do not want to share your this kind of information with people that are not fully committed to the organization. And in that kind of environment, you're probably only going to distribute with those that are committed at a management level and some that might be fully committed at different levels. It's no point to have the information and then hide the information from those that are required to make the changes. And that's my belief. Thanks, Neil, for your comments there and for the question as well. So I share with you that template. I hope you find it a template that it will be beneficial for you. But I wanted to show you a few examples of how we complete that template of the audit program. First, we need to make sure that everybody understands which ones are the actual objectives for this year when we implement it. So an example could be, as we have here, main purpose, ensure compliance with the standards, maintain high levels of student satisfaction with our products, and I talk about has to be higher than 80%. Ensure employability of our graduates. I'm talking about we want to achieve 70% employability after 3 months they complete the course. And we already defined that there are high risk areas in assessment practices, online delivery, transition from superseded program. In our case, pretty much every single training product has been superseded at the end of last year that we have in our scope, and the access to suitable trainers, particularly finding trainers with industry and currency competencies. Those are areas that for us are high risk based on the data that we got from last year and data that we collect from the industry in general. Of course, we're going to use that data to identify those high risk areas. So we need to somehow start, together as a team, as we can see over here, organize where we're going to audit. It's a huge universe of different things that we can audit, and we can go very crazy about this, but we don't want to get crazy because we got very limited resources. So there are a few things that we can use to actually classify that universe of auditable units, and those are doing it by training products, by processes that we follow, potentially projects, and keep in mind what I will put here as a mandate audits. So let's see what that is. The training products are quite easy. We find out what are the training products that we have on scope that we deliver. We look at the risk that each of them might represent. This is a copy of the ones that our RTO has on scope. And based on the number of enrollments, based on difficulties and outcomes of previous audits, we will give them a risk rating for our this year audit. Don't be surprised if there might be one product that we might don't even audit this year. It might be some products that we might audit twice or 3 times a year. As I said, we'll go by risk base. So we are very clear that in terms of risk, we got a regulatory compliance as a higher risk, because if we lose our registrations as an RTO, we got no business. If financial management, it continues to be an important part of a risk. The market shows that a lot of providers are competing with very cheap prices, that we are not able to get to that point because our costs are higher. And there's some technological changes in the way that we deliver online that we still don't have 100% under control, and those are representing high risk for us. Paul, talk about how do you determine your risks? That's a very good question, Paul, and we could spend the whole day on that, but let me tell you that basically we use a metrics. Those matrices that you guys are all familiar with, because we all learn in the WHS. We look at it first, the impact that those could have on us. Impact we measure by the financial impact, reputation, and the compliance impact of those different areas. And obviously we put as a we cannot accept risk that will take us out of business, either by that financial, reputation, or compliance impact, and we work through that metrics. Sorry if I'm not very specific with that answer, Paul, but hopefully you have an idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in that metrics how likely is that each of the areas that I'm going to talk now, for example, these certificates or the process, it might impact in our business, and we do it through those 5 scales of risk that we highly will take us, highly possible will take us out of business, very likely will take us out of business, very unlikely that will take us out of business at the bottom scale. Can everybody please use all panelists? Okay, sorry. Yeah, oh, sorry, yeah, please use panelists and attendees so we can see everybody's comments. So now that we understand that these are high risk for us, and it gives us the perspective of it, we want to find out what are we going to audit. So in our case, we find out that this year we want to audit these 4 training products. So as you can see, we're not going to audit all the products. We're going to audit the certificate for leadership and management, diploma, quality auditing, and graduate. The first 3 in the list have been superseded and new, so for us are high risk. And the last one, we got a number of students doing a transition, and that's why it represents a high risk for us. Another way to understand what we're going to audit. So we say, all right, products is one thing that we want to focus in our audits. What else can we audit? We can audit our processes. When you think in RTO processes, you can think in ASCO's definitions, which is good. I quite like it, to be honest. I don't follow specifically like this. I'll show you how we follow, but I think it's a very good step, first step. So they got marketing and recruitment, enrollment, support, training and assessment, completion, and regulatory compliance as internal processes that can be audited, because actually there are some requirements against each of those processes. We actually expanded that idea a little bit more. We got marketing practices, enrollment practices, support practices, but then that the industry, that training and assessment, we actually reorganize it as a industry consultation, training, design and delivery, assessment, including RPL, the certification process, the HR function of selecting, recruiting, and managing people, particularly trainers and managers, the financial management, and then, yes, the quality and the compliance management. So those are the different processes that we identify that are relevant to our operations, and any of those processes, it can be audited. So now we got 2 things that we can audit: the products and the processes. Does that make sense? You will see how these end up in a few minutes. But if you do have questions, please feel free to include them in the chat area. When you look at your products and your processes, it might be a good idea to also look at it, what ASCO think about high risk. And that's also, Paul, a good way to see risk. Use the information from external sources as well. For ASCO, these products here that are listed in these are high risk, at least during the next couple of years. So if you got any of these products on your scope, I would recommend you to audit them more frequently, because they are on ASCO's regulatory work. And ASCO believe that these clauses are clauses of concern, and they believe that they're high risk because most of the audits that they have conducted, the outcome of those audits shows you a non-compliant, which is exactly what we do as well in our internal audit program. How do we get to know how likely is that we're going to get a non-compliant in one of these areas? Well, we base that on statistics from previous audits. Now, if you haven't done any, it might be a good idea to look at what ASCO think about it. Neil says, so these qualifications are all high non-compliance areas from past audits. According to ASCO, that's correct, Neil. Yes. And I have to say, I agree with them. Something else that we can use for audits, and this is thinking more proactively, it's projects that you have in place. If you're going to apply for an addition to scope, put a new qualification or new skill set, it might be a good opportunity to plan ahead. And if I know that, well, we'll be applying for something new, I don't know, in June, I should audit the preparation of that evidence for that application. Or if I'm going to explore a new market that requires an application to ASCO, for example, like working with international students, that I will need to apply for Cricos provider. Or if I'm going to start a new branch, then it is a good idea to schedule an internal audit for the Cricos application or an internal audit fairly soon after that new branch started. And some people might wanted to do one before they started to make sure the preparation was done correctly. Another one 6 months after it started to make sure that it's working really well. Does that make sense? Any questions? In our case, for example, we thinking in applying for the TAE 40116 this year, some stage this year. So we're going to audit that before we put that application, of course. And then we need to think, is any mandate audits based on any contractual requirements that you might have with state of Commonwealth funding or any enterprise contract with one of your clients, or licensing requirements if you do high risk license, you might be required to actually conduct an internal audit every year or so. And for the purpose of your registration, that annual declaration on compliance, it clearly requires you to do an internal assessment, which we can consider that to be an audit at this stage. So for us, we said, look, the annual declaration of compliance, it needs the CEO to have a very clear picture of compliance. So let's make sure that we have covered all areas that are critical before our CEO signs that declaration. With that information, then we decide which ones are what we call auditing units. And the reason that we create auditing units is because later we're going to schedule audits to each of those auditing units. So our first, and this is just an example here for you that you can use in that template. Our first auditing unit that we put here is the marketing practices. So what are the objectives? Make sure we evaluate the compliance against that standard 4. But also we don't want to stop in compliance. We want to know whether or not our marketing are producing suitable leads. And suitable leads will have a meaning for us. I'll explain in a minute. So what is the criteria that we're going to use to compare whether or not we have achieved our objectives? Well, first, for compliance, standard 4, and we also want to evaluate internal compliance with our policies and procedures. And we want to make sure that a minimum 40% of our leads are converted. If not, maybe we have leads that are actually not interested, are not suitable for the courses. We don't want to spend time and effort in those. So this will be including the marketing processes that we use for every single training product. So we do marketing processes across all training products. We consider that this audit can be done as a desk audit, and the objective is evaluate compliance. And that is the method that we're going to use for this example here up on the top. And we are going to take quarterly audits on that unit of marketing practices. Any questions about that? Does that make any sense? Is that similar to what you guys are already doing, or is different to what you guys are doing? Any comments? All good? Karen, you want to say something? This is why I do expect every time we do good, all good, thanks. Slightly different to what we're doing, but on the same regular track. Excellent. Thank you. All clear, some new things to add to our plan. Good, Karen. Just to put a second example, we got an audit unit based on this product, the Diploma of Quality Auditing. We want to evaluate compliance against what we consider to be the high risk clauses in this case. And the high risk clauses that we define, as you can see, even though it includes most of ASQA ones, it adds others. So it doesn't need to be exactly what ASQA think. This is based on our own evaluation. So includes 1.1 through to 1.4, 1.8 through to 1.14. Then we add 1.16 and 3.1. So what are we going to do here? We're going to only audit this training product, Diploma of Quality Auditing, against all those clauses. And in this case, a desk audit will not be the right way to do it. So we want to do a site audit, and we wanted to explicitly, we put here in the plan that we wanted to do interviews with admin, managers, trainers, and students during the site audit. And that audit, it needs to happen at least twice a year or every 6 months. So this is quite general, and I would imagine that you have a number of what we call audit units, and you can use a template that I share with you to create your own program for the full year. As I said, you can do it for 2 years as well. In our case, just as a matter of information, we got around 12 audit units. We don't audit all those every year, but we do it within 3 years cycle. And then the next part is to actually put a date to that. So if we said that we're going to audit marketing every 3 months or quarterly, we want to see the dates that happens. So that happens in January, April, and then obviously a couple of times there. We audit that audit unit, which is marketing practices, that has been defined above. We need to put the name of the auditor that will execute that, and what do they need to do that audit? They need access to all marketing material, both paper-based and electronic, all marketing data generated in the last quarter of 2020, which is what they audited in January 2021, the marketing statistics for that quarter, the policy and procedures, and the actual template to do the audit. And the findings will be shared with the CEO and the management group, and they will share with others later. And we have the schedule. Obviously, we want to make sure that somebody conducts those audits as per schedule. With regards to the diploma, we said twice a year, so we go one in January, one in July. We'll tell who will be the auditor, should be there. What do we need? We need the relevant training and assessment strategies that we're going to audit. We need student records from the last 6 months. We're going to use a sample technique that we have internally. We're going to interview trainers. We're going to interview admin staff. We're going to survey and interview students in the last 6 months. And we're going to look at a sample of student records from enrollment, participation to assessment. We wanted to audit assessment tools and evidence of completed assessments using that sample technique. We want to look at the trainers' evidence, and we're going to look at the certification records. So the good thing about having this plan is that everybody understands what kind of evidence must be used in each of these audits. And that gives us the opportunity to actually compare the results of different audits. If we don't take this approach, then the results will not be compatible, and then we cannot make decisions for rectification or continuous improvement. It's important, of course, that audit process have some level of formality where you can do your planning, opening the meeting, collecting the evidence, analyzing the evidence against the criteria, providing the feedback immediately during the audit, and then after with the report. Those are basic steps that any audit should undertake. And we definitely need to do it if we're going to use it. But for that to happen, people working in this area must have the right competencies. In fact, the confidence and reliance that you can have in your own internal audit process, it will heavily depend on the competencies of your audit team and the people who actually conduct the audits. And those competencies are not going to refer too much because we only have 10 minutes left today. But those competencies can be organized as personal attributes, regulatory compliance and quality system competencies, vet knowledge, experience and qualifications, industry knowledge, experience and qualifications, and competencies as an auditor. So we wanted to put people in that audit function that have the ethical values to do so, the level of independence that is required, but they also understand the regulatory compliance requirements and how your quality system works. They also understand how the vet system works as a vocational training and the different processes that are critical for that to be successful. They understand the needs of the industry that you serve, and also said before, they understand the competencies required to do a comprehensive plan and to actually execute those audits. There are different ways to develop that, and I'll suggest that you look at it, those formal qualifications that are part of our national recognized training, either the full diploma or some of the skill sets that are part of that diploma, lead auditor, which is purely for auditors, and compliance skill sets, which in my opinion, everybody should actually have an understanding of those compliance skill sets. And that is one way to go. Other people go for ISO accreditations or certifications. Either way that you go, you need to make sure that people that will work in creating your audit program, audit plan, and actually conducting audits have the competencies to do so, because that underpins the value of that process. Once we do the audits, there's still work to do. So Goodmeets has a question there. What must be included in the training and assessment strategy to meet the compliance requirements? Yeah, Gurmeet, that's a very good question. I'm not sure I'm going to have time to answer that question today, but let me try to. And I would love you to look at ASCO's website. And I'm going to actually go by memory here, but ASCO website in the area of standards guidelines, it does include a list for it. But as a minimum, you need to include obviously the core and the title and code of the training product, the units of competency that you're including in that training product. In the case that is a qualification, of course, how those sets of units meet the packaging rules, the entry requirements that apply to your specific training products. And I'm not talking about prerequisites only, but entry requirements that applies to you. So for example, language literacy and numeracy, if you do it online, obviously having access to on internet and so on. The duration of the program or the amount of training is more legal terminology. The sequence of training activities and the delivery mode of each of those training activities. The sequence and times for your assessments and the type of assessments that will be used. Then the resources that are required to implement it. And when you're talking about resources, perhaps you should start with the most important one, that are your trainers and assessors and how they are compliant to deliver different units within the program, but also include the physical resources, the equipment and the facilities that are required to implement that training and assessment strategy. And finally, what are the quality assurance mechanisms that you're using, the one that has to be there, or the two that have to be there for sure, are the validation schedule for your assessment practices and how you will maintain monitoring on the feedback received from your students. Those are the minimum elements, and probably it might not be easy to keep it by memory. So I recommend you to go to ASCO website or send us an email. I'm happy to put that in an email for you, Gurmeet. I hope that answers your question. So coming back to our problem here is we got that information in the audits. What are we going to do? Particularly, what are we going to do when we discover a non-compliant? So we need to identify exactly that non-compliant against a specific requirement. And we need to eliminate that non-compliant. And eliminating non-compliant means actually doing things right now. So if we have, let's say, a training and assessment strategy that is not compliant, we'll eliminate that will be to create another one that it does meet the requirement. And that's the first step, but not the only step. We also need to take remedial actions. So we're going to manage the consequences. Let's say the problem that we have with that training and assessment strategy was that the course was too short and didn't allow students to actually develop the skills. So the consequences are that we probably trained, let's say, 50 people during the last 6 months, and now they don't have the skills because they didn't have enough time to develop those skills. Managing and putting a remedial action to that will be to provide extra training to those people that you identify. And that would apply to any other kind of issue with training or with assessment. And now, take actions to prevent the recurrence. How are we going to make sure that this problem is not going to happen again? So why it did happen at the beginning? Is it because we didn't have a system? The system wasn't clear. Or is it because the system wasn't communicated to our staff members correctly? Or is it because our staff don't have the skills to do it? We need to find that out and to put and take actions and put a plan in place to make sure that this is not going to happen again. That could include updating your procedures or providing extra training to your staff. Those are very formal steps that we do as auditors, and particularly in the function of internal audits. And the point that I want to make across is that unless we do this very formally and with the competencies required, you might be putting effort in something that it might not give you all the benefits. And that's why I'll suggest that you make sure that people within your organization have the right skills to do so. From an ASCO perspective, the focus is on self-assurance. And from an ASCO perspective, and again, I took this from ASCO's strategic plan 2020-2021, you got to find out the issues that arise during your self-assessment or audit. You got to manage the risks by eliminating the risk when it's possible, mitigating the risk and managing the consequences. And you're going to manage your regulatory compliance by continuously detecting potential or actual non-compliance and doing the rectification and taking the remediation actions. That should be part of your continuous improvement process. That should be embedded into managing compliance. And the point that we are trying to put across today is that requires an internal audit function for you to work on it, and the competencies for that to happen. Fernando, can we and thanks for that comment, Deb. It says it can be devastating impact if this doesn't occur, and I totally agree with you, Deb. Fernando, can we put the second poll, please, about competencies? And just as a matter of feedback, I would like to know, are you planning to develop auditors' competencies within your staff? And how are you planning to do that? Through work experience? Do you have the capacity to do some internal training? That's another another valid way of doing it, or putting them through some PD with some organizations, or giving them some formal training in a way of qualification or skill set, or you believe that your staff don't really need any training at all in this area of auditing. When you find it that we're ready, Fernando, just share with us the results, please. I'm conscious of time, and we only have a couple minutes. Fantastic. So yeah, that's great. So a lot of people trust in PD, and I think that's a very good option, and a good percentage also look at it different ways. Very interesting. Nobody says that your staff don't need training. Good. So thank you very much for your time. I want to let you know that we will send you a email with some promotions about our organization, ROI Institute. That template that I'm sharing with you is part of one of the multiple templates that we share with people that study with us, that diploma, that, as you can see, have been customized for RTOs. In fact, I am one of the trainers and the main trainer for that diploma in ROI Institute Australia. So if you do want to know more about it, get in touch with us. Those are our contact details. But for today, if there are any questions there, please write it down in the chat area. Happy to stay back a few more minutes. Gavin, thank you for that comment. Thank you. Thank you, Karen and Marie. Thank you. Catalina, thank you. I'll thank all of you. I hope this information will help you to think about how you manage that internal audit function. Thanks, everyone. And we will share the video later as well. Yes, Jill's will be a certificate to everybody that attended to it, attendance certificate that will be organized by our staff members. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and keep in touch with us. You got our contact details, and any questions, we more than happy to be of support. Thank you very much. Have a good day.